How can Gemma move an entire house into the further? Insidious, out of the further explained. Hello everyone, today we're going to explain one of the strangest moments in Insidious, out of the further. How can Gemma actually move an entire house into the further? Before we continue, here's your spoiler alert. We're going straight into Gemma's power, the house, the further, and what this scene means for the rules of the Insidious universe. At first, the scene seems almost impossible. We've already learned that Gemma is a courier, meaning she has a unique connection to the further. But moving herself between worlds is one thing. Moving an entire house is something completely different. So how does she do it? The key is understanding that Gemma isn't physically picking up the house and carrying it somewhere. Her power works more like transferring the house's location from one reality to another. Think of the further as another dimension existing alongside the normal world. Normally, a house exists completely on the living side. Gemma can create a connection between the two realms, and when she pushes that connection far enough, the boundary surrounding the house can effectively shift. That's why the scene is so important. Gemma isn't simply transporting an object, she's manipulating the space around it. The house becomes connected to the further as a whole, and once that happens, everything inside that space can be pulled across with it. That's why the scene feels so much bigger than anything we've seen from previous characters. Dalton can astral project, Elise can enter the further, but Gemma's ability operates on a completely different scale. She's affecting the boundary between realities. And that is why Cyrus is so interested in her. He realizes that if Gemma can move something as large as a house, then her power isn't limited to moving herself or a single person. She can potentially manipulate an entire location, and that means she could become one of the most powerful people connected to the further. But there's an important distinction. Gemma isn't necessarily creating a new house inside the further. The house already exists. What she's doing is effectively bringing that physical space into a realm where physical rules don't work the same way. That's also why the scene can feel confusing if you're thinking about the further as simply a ghost dimension. The movie treats it more like a supernatural space that can overlap with our own. And Gemma is capable of changing where that overlap happens. In other words, she doesn't just open a door, she can move the doorway. And that's an incredibly important difference. Normally, the red door represents a fixed passage into the further, but Gemma's courier ability allows her to create or manipulate that passage in ways ordinary astral projectors can't. The house becomes the doorway. That's the easiest way to understand what we're seeing. The entire structure becomes caught between the two worlds. And because Gemma has such a strong connection to the further, she's able to pull it across. But there's also a major risk. The more she brings into the further, the more unstable the situation becomes. Gemma's power isn't something that can be used without consequences. Every time she strengthens the connection between the worlds, she potentially gives the entities inside the further more access to the living world. And that's exactly what makes Cyrus's interest in her so dangerous. He doesn't just want Gemma to visit the further, he wants her to open the boundary. If she can move an entire house, imagine what else she could potentially bring across. A person, a group of people, an object, or even a supernatural entity. That's why the house scene effectively demonstrates the full potential of Gemma's ability. It's a visual way of telling us that Gemma isn't simply another psychic. She's a bridge, and bridges can connect two worlds. The house also has symbolic importance. A house normally represents safety. It's supposed to be a place separating you from everything outside. But in Insidious, that idea has always been unstable. The franchise repeatedly turns homes into places where the boundary between the living and supernatural worlds becomes weak. Out of the further takes that concept even further. Instead of entering the house, Gemma essentially takes the house into the supernatural realm. The safe place becomes part of the further, and that completely changes the rules. It also explains why the scene is so frightening. The characters aren't simply trapped in a haunted house anymore. They're trapped in a house that has been pulled into a world where normal rules don't apply. The walls, rooms, doors, and physical space can all become connected to the further. And if Gemma loses control, getting back could become extremely difficult. So, does Gemma permanently move the house into the further? The important thing is that her ability demonstrates she can transfer an entire physical space across the boundary. But the movie doesn't establish that she can casually do this whenever she wants. It requires an enormous amount of supernatural power and happens under very specific circumstances. That's important because otherwise Gemma would essentially become all-powerful. The movie still needs limitations. Her ability is extraordinary, but it isn't effortless. And that makes the house scene more believable within the movie's supernatural rules. She's not lifting a building with telekinesis, she's manipulating the connection between dimensions. That's the real trick. And once you understand that, the scene makes much more sense. Gemma doesn't need to physically move the house, she changes which side of reality the house belongs to. That's why the scene is such a major moment for her character. Until this point, Gemma has been trying to understand what she can do. But moving the house shows her and the audience just how powerful a courier can potentially become. And it also explains why Cyrus sees her as the key to his plan. He doesn't simply want a person who can enter the further. He wants someone who can bring the further with them. That's the terrifying possibility. If Gemma can move a house into the further, then the separation between our world and that realm isn't as permanent as everyone thought. And that's ultimately what the movie is trying to establish. The further isn't just somewhere you go, it's somewhere that can potentially reach back. And that question could become extremely important if Gemma's abilities continue to develop. Because moving the house isn't necessarily the limit of what a courier can do. If Gemma can manipulate an entire building, then she may eventually be able to affect other physical spaces or objects connected to the further. But there's a major danger. Every time Gemma strengthens the connection between the two worlds, she risks allowing something from the further to follow her back. That means her power could be both a weapon and a doorway. She can use it to protect people, but the same ability could also make the living world vulnerable. And that's exactly what Cyrus misunderstood. He saw Gemma's power as something he could control. But Gemma's ability doesn't belong to him. The house scene proves that she has the potential to reshape the boundary between worlds herself. And if she learns to control that power completely, she could become one of the most important characters in the Insidious mythology. Because Gemma isn't simply entering the further anymore. She's changing where the further begins.